Unions and businesses are battling it out over minimum wage. New data shows property sellers made big profits in the final quarter of last year, and Boeing CEO is bowing out. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Wednesday, the 27th of March, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Adam Lang.
Good morning, Michael.
Adam, Sean Aylmer is still away for the rest of the week. I like to picture him right now as not only listening to this podcast, but doing it while he and Jackie are having a couples massage.
Or maybe being taught how to surf at last.
That's probably more G-rated, isn't it?
Mm.
I mean, it's hard for him to listen to the podcast while he's surfing.
Aqua earbuds. Get some while you're away, Sean, and give us a report back.
Are they a real thing?
Not to my knowledge. But why not?
Okay. All right, now we're just making stuff up to start the show. Someone who is not making stuff up, Adam, is our guest today for the interview after the show. You are speaking with Eliza Owen from CoreLogic about one of the big stories today.
Yeah, Michael, and we talk about fear and greed being daily business news for people who make their own decisions. Listen to this interview with Eliza Owen if you are interested in property, because we know it's a spectator sport and it's a huge source of investment. This information, the pain and gain report that's out today, is all about the profits being made right now by people selling property, a median of $310,000. The numbers are huge and the statistics are really interesting. This is a must listen.
Yeah, it is indeed well worth a listen. It's coming up after the show. The main story this morning, though, Adam, the fight over minimum wage is heating up. As we mentioned earlier in the week on the show, the government wants wages to keep pace with inflation. But unsurprisingly, unions and employers are on a bit of a collision course. The Australian Council of Trade Unions wants a 5% annual increase to the minimum wage. They've asked the Fair Work Commission to lift it from $23.23 an hour to $24.39. That's a lift of about just a touch under $2,300 a year in the full-time wage, take it up to about $48,200. Now, this decision affects almost 3 million workers in Australia whose wages are linked to it, and it impacts around 100 separate industry awards. So, it is a big call.
Yes, Michael, it is. And it doesn't seem that long ago, but it was last year that the Commission increased the minimum wage by a record 5.75%. And that was amid high levels of inflation, as we know. In the March quarter of 2023, annual inflation was up 7%. Now, inflation is moderating somewhat, but it's still above the RBA's target band of 2 to 3%. At the end of 2023, it was around 4%, and there are signs it's coming down, but there is still a lot of cost of living pain being experienced.
Okay, so we know what unions are asking for. We know what the government is asking for. What about employers?
The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry has asked the Commission not to increase wages by more than 2%. The group's CEO, Andrew McKellar, said businesses are still facing significant pressure and wages are one of those cost factors restraining their future hiring. He also indicated that last year's minimum wage decision contained errors and he'd like to see those corrected with a lower rise this year. Employment Hero's latest SME index, released this week, shows that median hours are dropping and the median hourly wage is slipping. Small businesses in particular are struggling, slowing down their employee growth and cutting back paid hours to cope with economic pressure.
Yeah, it is a big, big story, this one. Turning to local markets now, and the S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.4% yesterday to 7,780 points. That's about 32 points lower.
Yes, it was a true mixed bag across the sectors. Energy and gold led the pack, with Karoon Energy, Beach Energy and Gold Road Resources doing well. Consumer staples were also up and utilities nudged slightly upwards too. Everything else fell back, led by IT and communication services. Analysts are keeping a close eye on whether there's going to be some profit taking from investors, with the bourse still at near record high levels. Biopharma business Mesoblast was a top performer of the day. Get this, Michael, up 45.5% following a US Food and Drug Administration decision to allow the company to resubmit a license application for its Ryoncil product. Solomon Lew's Premier was up 4.4%, and we'll have more on Premier later in the show. And copper and base metals company 29 Metals fell 25.9% after bad weather hit its copper mine in Queensland and halted work.
And what about international markets? What's going on there?
Michael, Chinese Premier Li Qiang has been talking up the Chinese economy, saying this year there have been improvements and the challenges in the property sector and with local government debt are not as serious as people think. Li was speaking at the International Monetary Fund and reassured investors that authorities will be ramping up their efforts to support growth. Beijing also reported solid export growth, industrial production figures, and investment.
Another big story in international markets at the moment, all about crypto. Adam, new data shows that last week was the biggest on record for crypto outflows. That's according to CoinShares, which found investors pulled out 942 million US dollars. The pullback comes after a 7-week period where 12 billion US dollars was poured into crypto, and Bitcoin hit new highs on March 14.
And Michael, it's not often we discuss the Mexican peso, but it's worth mentioning today.
I reckon this could be the first time we have brought up the peso on this podcast.
It's a fear and greed first.
Yeah, it feels wrong that we haven't discussed it before, but I mean, it's definitely worth discussing today because this is a great story.
Yeah, terrible omission. Welcome to the report, the Mexican peso. Bloomberg reports that the new derivatives data from the Commodities Futures Trading Commission shows the equivalent of about 5.2 billion in bullish peso trades. This is curious as it suggests that bets on the peso are at their highest levels since March 2023, and that is despite calls that it's overvalued. And just quickly, the Aussie dollar is fetching 65.4 US cents and gold is trading at 2,194 US dollars an ounce.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Adam, the proportion of property sellers making a profit in the December quarter jumped to 94%. The new CoreLogic Pain and Gain report shows the median gross profit increased to $310,000.
Yeah, Michael, we've got a lot more information after the show, but to give some of the key data, the new Pain and Gain report analysed 90,000 resales in the last quarter of 2023, and it found that sellers are overwhelmingly likely to make a solid profit. And those that make a loss, that's 6%, or about 5,500 sales, took a median $40,000 hit. Nominal profit overall hit $29.9 billion, and that was compared to $28.7 billion in the previous quarter. This time round, regional sellers were more likely to make a nominal gain alongside those with a longer holding period and those who were flipping a house rather than a unit. Adelaide has continued its 5-quarter streak of being the most profitable capital city. And these figures obviously don't take into account the transaction costs and costs of holding or undertaking property improvements, but they do suggest the strength in the housing market right now.
Yeah, it certainly suggests there is a bit of momentum there. Adam, Crown Melbourne will retain its casino licence after the gaming watchdog declared the systemic failings at the casino, including money laundering and terrorism financing, are, quote, a thing of the past.
Yeah, Michael, the timing is really interesting and it's a major hurdle cleared for Crown Resorts, which was bought by private equity giant Blackstone for $7.9 billion in 2022. The Victorian Gambling and Casino Control Commission said it was clearly satisfied Crown Melbourne should keep its licence following the damning findings of 2 royal commissions and a state inquiry. Yesterday, the Victorian regulator said there was no evidence of maladministration or illegal or improper conduct indicative of the serious and systemic failures previously identified by the Royal Commission, and these failings had been addressed. End of quote. The company has introduced significant reforms to limit the risk of gambling harm and financial crime at the venue. It's a very different story to what's been happening at the Star Entertainment Group, which is now facing a second inquiry in New South Wales because the state regulator didn't believe the casino operator had done enough to fix its own problems to do with money laundering and organised crime.
Adam, interesting to see banking bosses at the AFR Banking Summit yesterday warning that regulation of lenders is a bit too tight and that could be causing problems.
Yeah, Michael, the CEO of National Australia Bank, Ross McEwen, questioned whether the pendulum has moved a little bit too far and banks should be taking more risk, noting he was surprised at how little stress there is in the financial system given the rise in payday lending. And Australian Banking Association CEO Anna Bligh raised concerns that young people were locked out of the housing market due to risk-averse banks on the back of tighter lending laws.
Gina Rinehart's Cenex Energy has blamed a long list of successive federal governments for intervening and leaving Australia at risk of a gas shortfall. There are concerns right now among big industries that new supply needs to be brought into Australia to avoid a gas shortage.
Cenex Energy CEO Ian Davis said in a speech yesterday that Labor and state governments need to show support for gas, and there has to be quick change to keep the lights on, ensure manufacturing jobs aren't at risk, and support the energy transition. He blamed, quote, unrelenting gas market intervention, unquote, and criticised the government for doing little more than making announcements. Cenex is particularly frustrated by its $1 billion expansion plans, which it submitted for environmental approval 500 days ago. Labor has said it will streamline approvals for resource projects.
Adam, consumer confidence is improving. That's a little bit of good economic news following the Reserve Bank's slightly softer language at its meeting last week and then a strong jobs figure shortly after.
Yes, the latest ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Report shows a 1.4 point lift in the index. There was a small rise in inflation expectations, though. While short-term expectations for the economy slipped, there's more optimism over the medium term. And interestingly, while renters remain the least confident group by housing type, they did have a strong 7-point rise in the index, bringing them to their highest level since January, and that's good news. But complicating this picture a bit is the competing Westpac Consumer Sentiment Index. It has found confidence is down a bit, and while interest rate fears are easing, it's very gradual. They're calling the lift in consumer gloom slow at best.
That doesn't sound overwhelmingly positive, Adam.
No, there's a lot of caution in that.
Yes, I think you might be right there. Now, Solomon Lew is continuing to pursue spinning off his major brands, including a demerger of stationery arm Smiggle, which is due early next year.
It's all happening at Lew's retail giant Premier Investments, where there has been a strategic review of the business. And as a result of this review, Premier is looking at a demerger of Peter Alexander. It has indicated that it's planning to open Smiggle stores in Indonesia and expand Peter Alexander into the UK this year. Good news for them, Michael. They'll be able to buy the same pyjamas you love. Premier reported that sales have good momentum over the first 8 weeks of the calendar year, and this is good news for the business, particularly given higher interest rates have led to ongoing speculation over what it means for discretionary purchases.
Are you a Peter Alexander pajama wearer, Adam?
No, but we have some in our house.
But you don't wear them?
Not myself.
Okay, all right. I'm just going to leave that one to the imagination right now. If you're not wearing the pajamas, what are you wearing? Moving on, unfortunately, a bit of bad news for those looking for a job right now. Seek's latest employment data for February shows a sharp decline in job ads. The advertisements actually fell 2.5% over February. Year on year, they are down 18.6%. This is leading to a sharp rise in the number of applications per job ad.
Yes, and this tells us that competition is heating up for the available jobs right now. The picture is patchy, though. In Tasmania, job ads were up 1.1%, but every other state and territory fell, led by Victoria down 3.6%. Now, looking at it on an industry-specific basis is also interesting, with more jobs in IT in February than in January. So that's been growing. There were steep falls for administration, hospitality, and tourism roles on a monthly basis.
All right, turning to international news now, and Boeing's CEO, Dave Calhoun, is stepping down at the end of this year. He's one of several key executive moves at the aircraft manufacturer. Of course, it comes amid pretty intense scrutiny of safety and quality at the company after a big problem in January when an Alaska Airlines flight on the 737 MAX aircraft had a mid-air blowout.
Michael, 2 weeks ago, the US Department of Justice opened a new criminal investigation into the incident, with passengers being interviewed. The department is especially looking into whether Boeing complied with its 2021 settlement terms after faults in the 737 system caused 2 crashes.
The US government has filed a landmark antitrust lawsuit against tech behemoth Apple, claiming it has an illegal iPhone monopoly. This is a big story.
It is, Michael. And this claim from the US Department of Justice says Apple violated antitrust laws and locked users into its products. It also looks at Apple's actions in squeezing out competition from messaging services, digital wallets, and cloud streaming. Apple has argued the lawsuit is wrong and threatens to set a dangerous precedent of heavy-handed government.
And finally, Adam, I know that you are missing your daily Donald Trump story. So here, this one is an absolute cracker. Trump has entered the world's top 500 richest people list for the first time after a fairly significant spike in his net worth.
This is a bombshell from Donald Trump. Big news. On Monday, US time, Trump had his best day on record. His net worth has surged to US $6.4 billion. The Trump Media and Technology Group deal we've been talking about finished up its almost 2.5-year merger process, and Trump's net worth jumped $4 billion. He's now among the top 500 wealthiest on Bloomberg's Billionaire Index. According to Bloomberg, his last peak net worth was US $3.1 billion on the back of his real estate empire. Now, that's not the only bit of good news for Trump. He was also up against a deadline to post a US $500 million bond in a New York lawsuit, and he was reportedly struggling to meet that payment, but that has been cut to US $175 million in the state appeals court, and he said he'd pay it.
Yeah, very big day for Donald Trump. Very big day overall, actually. There's been a lot of news to get through, and you've got a big interview up next with Eliza Owen from CoreLogic, all about the pain and gain report.
Yeah, Michael, this really is excellent data, as we've said earlier in the podcast. There is information here that everyone who's interested in property, whether you rent or whether you've got a mortgage or whether you own your property outright, will really help you understand the context in which you might be trading in one day, even if not now. So I really encourage you to listen. There's also, I asked Eliza, a somewhat unfair question about a league table of the top and worst suburbs to be selling in.
Of course, you would just want to drill down even more into the data, wouldn't you? Like, it's just...
It was a good answer too.
Yes, he handles it very, very well. Yeah, it's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And of course, today being Wednesday, there is a new episode of our sister podcast, How Do They Afford That?, out today, which features Canna Campbell, financial planner and founder of Sugar Mama TV. This week, we're looking at savings accounts, basically how to pick a savings account, because there's so many options for what to do with your money, kind of whether it's investing in different assets. But if you're just looking at the humble savings account, what are you actually looking at? What should you be looking for? And should you be considering term deposits? Should you be considering perhaps offset accounts? So it's really an explainer and just a broad look at that topic. You'll find How Do They Afford That? Wherever you listen to podcasts, and I'll put a link in today's show notes.
I'll be listening as usual, and I'll be exploring just how much information I can get and whether we're in a saver's market.
Oh, yes, that's a very good point, Adam, and I'm very glad I made it during the episode, so you'll enjoy listening to that one. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 27th of March, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast, and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.